Hi there and welcome. My name is Derek Feldman. I'm excited to be with you for the next 45 minutes to the hour, talking about this year's Millennial Impact Report. If you haven't heard about the Impact Report, obviously we'll give you some background on that. Over the course of this 45 minutes or so, you're getting an advanced preview of what is to be released on June 24th, a couple days from now, at MCon, which is the two-day conference on influence and the millennial generation and cause activation. What's exciting about this year's report and preview for you is I'm going to give you some information that probably not a lot of people are going to get as to why and how we got to this point. What are the things that we're very interested in learning from this year? What happened? Where we're going to as well. So there's a couple of things that I need to give you in advance. You were sent to your inbox. Hopefully by now you've received it and opened it, the full report. I ask that you not share it yet. I know that's crazy, but really that's helpful on our end because it's embargoed. And what that means is that we are going to be saving it until June 24th. And because you're a premium ticket holder or a research partner, or a special friend of ours, you're on this webinar right now because we wanted to make sure that you learned about it directly from us before just reading it, and to provide some context too as well. So I know how everybody talks about sharing things, but right now we need you not to share that as it's embargoed, as we do have some media outlets that will be talking about it, and we've given them the advanced preview too as well, and so they're going to have first hands to it. The other thing is you're more than welcome to share that you're on this webinar, but we ask that you not take or use any photos from this session either too as well. Lastly, I want to say that as you really look through this report in general, I think what's really important for you to understand is that this is a great time as we're trying to understand what motivations and things are happening in the workplace. You're going to probably have a ton of questions as you go through this. A lot of our folks that are on this session are going to be in attendance at MCon. And so this is a time that you can get together and talk too in our premium MCon lounge that's with Conscious Magazine. So there's a great time for you to hang out there and listen. And I'll be in there in a few times too. And I encourage you over the course of the next 2 to 3 days, as we see each other at MCon or online in some way, that you come up and ask me questions, or you come up and ask our team too as well, because they're all well versed in some of the things that we've discovered this year. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and dive in. Oh, and one more thing. You should note that we are recording this, and we're going to be giving you the recording later on so that you have a chance to look at this and go back in case if you missed something in general. Lastly, you're also going to get this presentation too as well. So if you happen to take notes and you miss something, don't worry. You can even share this presentation with your folks in your office as well there and help people understand, or maybe even replay the recording too. Let's talk about the Millennial Impact in general. So it's about 6 years ago or so now, we started the Millennial Impact Project to try and understand why and how millennials are doing what they do with causes. What's different than our studies is that we've never meant to go out and compare generations. If you look historically at all of the data we release publicly and some of the data that we hold, all of it is about getting the millennials' perspective and point of view. Only this year did we actually capture a little bit of non-millennial data to do some comparisons against in a manager category, which I'll talk about. But consistently, our methodology and purpose has always been focused on what is the millennial in this? What's happening? With the goal that we can help companies and organizations try and understand what to do and what not to do. And in general, that brings us to a place of learning and thought leadership, hopefully, that helps you as practitioners and leaders and thought leaders yourselves to enact upon your own plan from there. In the first 4 years of the Millennial Impact Project, our focus was singularly on how and why that millennial does what they do with causes on their own, really with no influence as outside other pieces. Although we talked about peer engagement and peer influence to a certain extent, we didn't go too far with that. And then about 2 years ago, we made a strategic switch to focus on the workplace. It's important that we look at the workplace today for two major reasons. One is a vast majority of an individual's time during the week is at the workplace. Secondly, within about 10 years or so, the demographics of our workplaces are going to be drastically changing, with millennials becoming the majority age bracket and demographic of all of our employee base. And what we also noticed in the first 4 years is that as we were going through some of the studies in general, is that a key thing that kept on coming up time and time again overall was actually this piece around millennials doing something in the workplace, doing something out there in general. And what was important to see is that what was important to really see as we were kind of going through this is that if we're to talk about cause engagement in general, cause engagement as we look at it, that cause engagement happens in many different facets, in many different segments of our life, not just on their own, but also in the workplace. And what we also started to notice, especially last year, as we reported workplace data and information, that as that workplace data started to come out, we noticed that a lot of that data and information, the qualitative behaviors that we're starting to monitor, a lot of that was influenced by other people and other things. And that really gets to what our goal is this year in general. So as we look at this year in general, our major focus is for this. We wanted to understand what is the influence that a millennial has, or actually a manager or other people in and around that millennial in the workplace. What is that influence like, and how dominant is that influence to get a millennial employee to participate in cause work? When we looked at year one, we started to notice that, yeah, there's a lot of good activity occurring, but why and who's doing it? And is there authentic reasons for doing that too as well? So this year, as you'll see on our screen, we took an approach to understand employees and their managers. Because our hypothesis going in to this concept around influence is that as an individual participates in the workplace, there are other influences that might occur to get that individual to participate more than others, or more reasons why, like a coworker or an incentive or a competition or a policy. All of these things might do it outside of what we would call normal, inspiring, philanthropic behavior. And that's really like the space we are. So here's how this year's research is designed. We looked at it from millennials, studying millennials and their managers in particular, representative samples nationwide of all of that. As we look at managers, we also for the first time started to understand what is the difference between a millennial manager and a non-millennial manager, and are there differences? So we actually do have data, which you'll see a little bit of that in here, from boomers and Xers who are managers, and maybe if there's any bigger instances in some of the data. What you're going to find today is all of our quantitative research in the first phase of our reports. Over the course of the next year, every 3 months, we are going to be debuting qualitative components at each one of those 3-month intervals. So in October, January, and March. And at each one of those intervals, we're going to be sharing with you a panel that we've set up to track behavior of employees and what they're really doing. We're going to be validating the survey data that I talked to you about today. And then third, we're going to be doing qualitative interviews and qualitative different measures and focus areas, again, to not only validate, but to also pull in your questions. The greatest thing that we try to do is not make this data live today and not get changed or looking at it as well. Over the course of the next year, our goal is to hear from you and get questions that you may have. And if we don't know those questions, those are great opportunities from our research team to bring them into the qualitative phases of the research to try and understand maybe what you're trying to learn and know. So again, the groups that we set up, we studied employees and their managers. Now, what's also interesting about influence is that as we were designing the samples this year of employees and managers, we also wanted to go an even step further. We wanted to understand, are things different at certain companies than others? So what we did is that we went out and recruited research partners. Some of those research partners are actually on the call today as well. But we recruited these research partners, all different company sizes. So we have company A, big company, 170 billion in market capitalization, all the way down to company E, who is a private small business as well. All of these different sizes allows us to compare millennial employees in different companies to each other. And then in addition, we also created a representative sample, recruited that. So now we're able to compare, well, how does company A compare to a sample of people that is their national norm? And how is that different than, say, a small business? And in particular, maybe how is a boomer manager in company A, who's a big company, different than a boomer manager in company D when working with millennials? We have that ability this year. So if you kind of look at it and you slice it and dice it several different ways, we have the ability through this year's research to understand motivations and interest in what's happening between managers and their millennial employees and what's happening between those two groups in different size companies. And over the course of the year, we're going to be debuting different aspects that we have in each one of these to help you continue to learn. And again, this is something that we ask you also for your feedback as well. What we have done here over the course of the next 30 minutes is organize all of the information into three major categories. Now, you're going to notice in the report, if you haven't looked at it yet, is that in the report, there are a lot of different elements out there and there's much more in depth. But what I'm going to do is talk about some of the key pieces and some things that I'll be honest that we're a little intrigued by that we're going to bring into the qualitative phases as well. Now, at the end, I may have some time for some questions, so feel free in your panel area on your computer here, or however you're viewing this, to put those questions in there, and hopefully I'll get able to get to those. If I don't get to them, save them, and hopefully ask me when I see you at MCon if I'm not busy running around or being with you. But if not, we can hopefully get you some answers later on, of course. All right, so let's talk about the giving category. In giving, we cover everything from personal giving through the workplace to giving campaigns, federated campaigns, all different types. So here is what we learned first. Millennial employees from the smaller companies and that sample were actually more likely to make donations to causes that their company wasn't associated with than employees from larger companies. What we started to see is that some of the companies spent some time, obviously, directing them to get involved or giving to certain categories like a United Way campaign or something else. And we did see that they were more likely to get donations if that choice was there in the smaller companies that we had too, which during the qualitative parts, we'll get into this more, but we're seeing more of those employees have offer and want choice than we did anywhere else. And a lot of the smaller to mid-size of the companies that we had, including the sample, we were seeing that actually happen when that was given. Incentives and competition actually motivated millennials in the workplace to donate more. But I want to put a little asterisk next to this because although in the beginning, an incentive such as like Jeans Day and take a day off if you do this, or all of those help to acquire the millennial to participate, it actually long-term didn't withstand itself. You're going to find out later in influence that the incentives and competition once in the beginning definitely had that impact, but it slowly lost its social capital and leverage over time. Because we looked at employees between 3 and 5 years that were in companies, we were able to report what newer employees were doing versus older employees, or at least longer employees at that company. And the incentives and competition place, although good in the beginning, it didn't retain them in that cause type environment, especially in the giving area. Managers overall were much more likely to participate if their employer did matching for their gifts. Later on, you're going to notice something in here that we were a little bit surprised by. And that's a stat which I'll share, but I'll share it briefly now with you, is that 13% of the millennial employees in our study actually participated in a matching program. What's also interesting, though, is that we have a higher percentage of those wanting to do it. But the real people who took advantage of it were actually managers alone. And so this is one where policy might have existed or the opportunity was there, but we just didn't see a lot of participation. Something we need to really break down in there. Initially, right now in our qualitative pieces, we're hearing a lot about uneducation or not understanding what that policy really is, or even if it really existed, although they were told of it at some point. When you look overall at the employees that were in our surveys, about 84% of them made a charitable deduction. Now, there's some other data points on here, but I think what's really important that I want to pull your attention to is the 11% number that you see on the right-hand side. 11% actually had their donation deducted from their paycheck this year. This is an ease of use. So we often acquire the millennial, or that we look at millennial employees with, right? So opportunities, it's not a huge thing, of course, that we had seen. And in our tracking overall, we haven't seen it be such a big thing as well. What's also very interesting that you should note is the number right above that. It's 28. 28% actually donated a check or cash on site. And you're like, why is that the case? Well, there's something that we started to notice in the company workplace that I'm sure some of you who are in the CSR world start to also get anxiety about at times. We noticed that there are two parts going on. There's one part which is sanctioned, what we would call sanctioned philanthropy. That means this company provides a program, offers a formal program, company pushes that down, tries to inspire its group to get involved. However, we also have what we would call unsanctioned philanthropy, where Margie next door, who has a cause that she cares about, brings it into the workplace. What's interesting is that in our qualitative pieces so far, the millennial didn't discern between the two. They viewed them in the same, that this is all happening in the workplace. And to a certain extent, that's where we got some of that high number from too. So we have these, so what's here to know is that we've got sanctioned philanthropy and unsanctioned philanthropy. A lot of this unsanctioned is inspired by coworkers as well as some managers, and a lot of that sanctioned is from the top down. These are battling between the two for employee attention and resources. When you compare millennial employees to managers themselves, this is what we notice. There's not a ton different in the amount that they actually donated overall, if you look at the percentages. I will say, though, that if you look at the bottom rung, obviously you'll see that we have a lot of employees who didn't donate as much as managers did overall. So yes, that did occur. And you do have more employees with our millennials that donated less. But even if you look at some of the comparisons, they're fairly statistically evenly out there. As we look here, this piece, 48% have actually donated through a giving campaign that was promoted by the employer at some point overall. What's also interesting is that if you look at those that did, 54% of it did it because a supervisor influenced them to in some manner. So again, this is where we're getting high participation, high interest in what's going on. And it's also a time where we can see this interest of millennials who are participating in giving programs, but being asked to, not necessarily just on their own. So the influence is starting to get a little bit higher. As you see here on this piece, you're going to notice that that managers gave a little bit more. Remember, I just reported that 84% gave of our employees, and 92% of managers actually gave. You'll notice too that 74% of those managers would be more likely to donate. The company matched at least some or part of it. And as you'll look on the right-hand side, you'll start to get into the other factors of influence, like where and how it was solicited, or encouragement, and so on. In general, what we say is that the competition piece over time with the manager also didn't last as well. And because a coworker asked them, they weren't as encouraged to participate as much as you're going to see in a minute, a CEO or higher level. So the manager, greatly influenced by the top level. So we'll have to talk about what happens though when we get to the employee in general. 31% of the employees donated through their company giving campaign, said that if their employee actually offered to match or a portion of it, they would have done it. Now, what's very interesting is that almost all of our companies had a match program. So there was the difference between education as well. And the competition phase in the beginning and matching. So all of these leverage pieces definitely sparked participation by employees, but not long term. Now, if you look at manager versus, when you look at managers, millennial and those non-millennial managers, what we would call boomers or Xers, or even maybe older than that, mostly boomers and Xers, you're going to notice that it's fairly similar, except millennial managers, we had a little bit more that didn't donate on the bottom there. But But overall, some of the very similar giving rates, only a 5 to 4% variance between the two, between millennials and non-managed, some of that being the terms of assets as well. So we do see a little bit of a difference between millennial managers and non-millennial managers. Nothing completely significant, but we did notice that they're not giving as much, but that's also based on phase of life cycle as well. All right, so now let's talk about the service area. In the service area, we are going to discuss here around volunteerism, pro bono skills, all of those things, and helping out in the community. We wanted to try and understand why the participation was occurring. So the longer managers worked at the company, so these are managers, individuals that supervise, obviously, the less the opportunity to volunteer with coworkers motivated them. We started to notice that these things like team building, excitement, all of that stuff for the manager was less of an interest per se because of coworkers and more of an opportunity because the CEO instructed them to. It wasn't a surprise that employees from the larger companies had actually higher volunteer rates than we did see with our smaller business kind companies and all the way leading up. Now, they also were targeting and they had resources targeted towards potential volunteer type projects and programs. And they were also very intentional for having staff people in those areas to promote. But in general, we did see higher rates, but a lot of that also we saw based on comparison to what resources that they had. When you look at millennial employees versus managers and how many hours they're spending, you're going to notice that here it's the millennial employees spent more time in general than we did see with managers. What I think is really important here is that look at the 45% number. They were promoted by their company. What's key is that yes, we did see higher participation rates in volunteerism when the employer was actually promoting them. When the employer didn't have it or wasn't promoting, we saw lower rates. In addition, what's also interesting about millennial employees, 37% of them had actually volunteered up to 10 hours, which is quite a great feat as we look at an employee base in general. When we look at millennial managers and those boomer and Xer managers, we also can do some comparisons as what we're seeing and how many hours spent overall. We had more so those boomers and Xers not volunteer, as you'll see there in the bottom categories, but it fairly evens itself out, except again that millennial managers actually volunteered about 10% difference in more than 40 hours. So this is a really great piece as we see companies who are looking to design projects and programs where they include and work with managers, that some of these managers, especially if they're millennial, are having higher participation rates, something to keep an eye out as you look to design these types of programs. All right, so those are the major service categories. And again, you have a full report to go through everything else, but I want to talk through the influence area, or what we're calling how to inspire giving and service and this cause work in general. As I mentioned earlier, our focus was why and how is this occurring? What's actually happening out there in general? Our hypothesis at the beginning, before we got to this year's data points and research methodology, we established a hypothesis that the manager by far was the most influential in the workplace. In fact, that the rest of the components of the workplace, the HR capital that exist, employees and CEOs and C-suite executives, when you compare all of those two, we went into it thinking that our hypothesis was based that the manager by far had the most. In fact, what we saw is that the peer coworker had the most, even more than the manager, then followed by the manager, and then eventually the CEO. Now, here's what's important to note here, that I've also made a note to other media as well, is that it is not an or scenario. So it doesn't mean that, okay, let's just ignore what the CEO wants or using that CEO, but rather let's go directly down to the grassroots level of the company. What we are finding now is that you need both, right? You need the CEO to agree that this is going to occur. You need the CEO to be behind it, but you need to activate at the smallest level. And that's where the activation points are different than what we've seen. Historically, when you look at companies and nonprofits have typically taken this approach to say, well, if you get the CEO, the remainder comes on board, right? The company falls with it and they'll participate as well. What we're finding though is that yes, the CEO is in there and his influence is really down only to the manager level. And from there, the manager and the coworker is much more influential than the rest. And so our hypothesis actually wasn't true. We discovered that the coworker was much more powerful to influence the individual to activate than the manager. And from there, the CEO's power all the way down was even less. What's also note here too is that as you look at the authenticity of the CEO participating in types of programs and different kinds of things where you really are trying to heighten cause engagement, millennials in our early qualitative pieces, I'm giving you a little sneak peek, could understand, witness, and talk about the inauthenticity that their CEO would discuss with the company when it came to cause stuff. They knew that the CEO was one of the first who is not necessarily out there volunteering with them or doing any of these things, and in fact wasn't as authentic as other types of relationships that they had seen. The second thing is that the longer the employee was actually at the company, the less the manager really influenced them to participate in general. And now there's two shifts that we would see in this. One shift is that in the early onsets, the millennials participating in all different types of cause stuff and policies. Then over time, as they start to participate, their interest in some of these areas starts to change, and they start to move away from doing it just because the manager said it, but creating their own path within the company in general. That's a very key piece we're starting to hear and see in the qualitative parts that as practitioners we have to think about. Because if you're a nonprofit, right, and you look at this research this year, you want to look at it and say, my gosh, we have to create two different types of messages. One for the CEO to go out and get on board, and two for their company's managers to actually help. But then over time, we also got to think about a message that goes directly to employees to get them to activate based on personal interest and passion, rather than before our model might have been just at the C-suite level down. And as you look at influence from the behavior side of this over time, you'll start to notice too is that as the employee starts to gather their own foothold within the company, these things like incentives and manager influence and all of that starts to become secondary to this is where I want to start spending my time as well. This is the natural progression some of us will see through other generations as somebody starts to move away necessarily from peer influence to participation on their own to what's actually happening and where their interest lies. Managers, as I mentioned, were just much more likely to be influenced by the CEO or other executives participating in the cause work side. And that was likely to have happened. And that's where we feel this is a great thing is that we don't need that CEO necessarily to help get the employees all the way involved. We really need that CEO to help activate the managers who will in essence activate the employees from there. So it's a different strategy for CSR professionals so that they say, CEO, this is what we need. And we really need you to message to just the managers at this point so they can go out to as well. In addition, this is also a part where we really have to use managers much more effectively. In a lot of our studies over the course of the last 3 to 6 months, we started to notice two things were occurring. On paper, we would look at, say, a team or a department within a company. And what we started to hear and see is, this employee base in this team is not participating. So I could have reported to you, which we reported a little bit, is this team is a poor performing cause engagement team. However, when you sit down in the qualitative side of this, we should try and figure out why. Because we can report activity, but we also need to report the inference as to what's going on. We start to notice that the major reason why is also education-based. Not aware of the programs, not aware of the projects, not aware of the policy. And when managers weren't aware of some of these things, they were also very clear not to persuade or dissuade. They would just remain neutral. And remaining neutral when the millennial employee who's really got high instances of cause interest, right? High interest, and it comes off like the manager doesn't want to do this. But we also know from our studies that managers were not always educated about what the actual policies or what was going on with the cause stuff, or how an employee could take advantage of a program on their own. because those were the things necessarily that weren't promoted. Almost a lot of the promotion internally was for those organizations and those initiatives. That really was more company-wide than it was individual basis. Over time, the manager and the employee, the competition and incentives just didn't have that influence. I mentioned this earlier, is that as we see, it's kind of becomes a good opportunity in the beginning to influence the behavior episodically, but it wasn't one to retain over time. And that's something that, again, as we see that a millennial employee moving from a state of doing this because of something else and somebody else influencing them to shifting towards a much more personal interest on their own. As you look at the likeliness to donate, in general, again, the employee, the fellow employee, whether it is a sanctioned or unsanctioned opportunity, was participating at higher rates because of a fellow coworker, as compared to those managers or those CEO who is likely telling them to do it. But again, I think as we look at this, I was having a media call the late last week, and somebody said, so you're saying in general that we need to look at this and just completely work with coworkers. Not necessarily. What I'm saying is that we need to look at this from a segmented approach rather than just say, this company-wide message goes down and everybody just participates. It's rather, what is the message we want to give employees? What is the message we want to give their coworkers, and how to get fellow employees involved, or at least can't cause ambassadors internally at the company? And what's the message that we want to work with at the manager level? That becomes an activation strategy. And how do we get and onboard the individual into this? And as you notice about this sort of twofold instances that we're seeing, we're going to do this more in the qualitative part, but I want to share with you some early data points that bring us to the point of that we have to further analyze and study this. If you look at the categories of why somebody donated or why they did it, right? This could be through a giving campaign, this could be through something else. You notice that 31% is a passionate cause area. Well, that's because if you look at that passionate cause area, that would be me making an internal decision on my own that this cause or this issue area is something that I care about. I've internalized it to a certain extent. If you look at it from the perspective of the other ones, the 13% that did a leveraged opportunity, or some supervisor just said you need to do this to donate, all of those, if you weigh all of that, it's about 10 to 15% higher. And what happens then is that we've got two mentalities that are occurring in our employee base. One who's doing it authentically for personal passion reasons. And then the second one is that you got a camp of individuals who are participating, employees, millennials in particular, that are doing it for not necessarily personal passion reasons, but because leverage or supervisors. So this undue influence that's occurring. So because we realize we have that, this is where we would encourage employers to take a game out of what some of the nonprofits are doing by saying, how can we create an authentic relationship with our constituents so that they activate and participate in the things that they care about, the things like choice and so forth, and build those in. So how can we create a model that's company-wide, team-based, manager department-wide, as well as individual-wide? And those are different tracks that we bring employees in through and onboard them on. Because we know that we've got these two camps, one that's doing it because of authentic reasons and one that's doing it for other leveraged reasons. And so therefore, we need to at least create the environments that allow somebody to act upon all of those. One of our research partners does this really well. We notice in a lot of the things we receive from the employees. They have offerings at all three levels: company, team, department, and team and department as one. And then the third one is individuals. They do a very good job talking about, let me help you understand, employees, why the company is participating with these initiatives. There's a corporate reason, and therefore you're going to notice those. But please understand that that's who we are as a company. Those are our values, those are our position. It might be because our consumers that buy our products and services are deeply affected by an issue, or our employee base is. There's some sort of reason that gets there. Then the second one is allowing the freedom for the department or team to create their own cause engagement experiences. And then lastly is on the individual level, so they can go out and do that. What's interesting is that a lot of companies actually have the policies established that we've seen through our research partners. They have corporate giving days, corporate days of service. They've got opportunities that managers can create, although maybe well or less known. And then they even have policies that allow the individual to go out and do their own time or get their own donation matched. It's explaining it in a manner that helps that platform come out to say we value all aspects that way rather than one or the other. And so promoting the individualistic opportunity as much as you promote the company wide. And as I mentioned, willing to participate because the CEO had participated is much higher, obviously, that we had seen than in the other employee base, which is not a surprise. As we started to get into this, we did throw some cultural questions and relational questions into our study this year, because what we wanted to make sure, and I'm sure you might be looking at this too, is this just a group of demographics that don't like their manager, they don't like work, and they don't like their supervisor, or why are they not interested? And actually, what we're finding both quantitative and qualitative is complete opposite. They really respect their supervisors. The demographic, this millennial employee base that we studied, they not only respect them, but they're participatory in other things. It's just in their cause space, these are some of the issues and things that they started to bring up as more influential when it came from their fellow coworkers and others. A couple things about modeling behavior that was really, really important that we cannot stress enough, and this also comes from the CEO top level down, is that as employees were there, this sense of seeing and witnessing their supervisor and their CEO participating in the projects were very, very important. And in fact, as we started to look and see that as this participation grows, it's the modeling of the behavior that we hope to see that will get us to a state of saying, all right, we not only are a company that says this, but we also do this too as well. So here's where we'll end with some of the biggest pieces that we saw from the research. And then I'm going to give you where we're going. And if you have a few questions, you can put those in if we get to it. And we'll get you out of here about 15 till the hour. First and foremost is that peers and direct supervisors have the most influence. Primarily those peers do, not the company leadership. But it can't be a substitute. You can't just immediately go down. You need the C-suite buy-in. You need activation to occur at the lowest levels, and we can't ignore and expect one to follow the other. We also saw, based upon the companies that we had and the qualitative pieces now, is that cause engagement occurs at its highest rates overall when we have these decentralized cultures that exist where there's choice and opportunity at the lowest levels and can funnel itself back up. Now, here's something that we started to notice, which we're going to mention in sort of a thought piece that we're going to put out there. When we compare what's happened in the workplace to how nonprofits engage in the workplace with companies, there's an interesting parallel effect that's starting to occur. This is where the nonprofit sector was just a little bit behind in the corporate world. So as millennials started to get more and more entrenched in the company, hiring and recruiting more millennial employees to participate and activate, we noticed that companies started to create policies like results-only work environments or other sort of cultural initiatives to allow the individual at its lowest level to create self-organized, define and around teams and so forth. So companies shifted as well into more decentralized cultures than ever before. Although there's hierarchy, we still had a lot of decision making that's also occurring at the lowest levels. Well, nonprofits were still looking at a historic model that said we're going to go into the CEO suite to get them to agree and then push it down that way. We can't do that anymore as causes and organizations. We need to say, yes, we need them, but company CEO, if you come on board, which is great, we need that. We also want your managers too. So can we work with them directly and make that happen? Or at least work with your CSR team to work that and make it much more of an employee base that's participatory. We're studying different models out there, from the Patagonia model of their corporate engagement to even the New Belgium model of beer and what they're doing over there. I mean, those are all newer type companies, although Patagonia has historically had a very strong corporate CSR program where a lot of us have taken a lot of modeling from. And if you look at those models, it embeds choice at all levels. And it also brings the decentralized culture that exists on the product and service side all the way to the cause side as well. So essentially what we're saying is is companies and nonprofits, let's start to match how teams operate within a company and how do they produce products and services like how they operate when it comes to cause engagement as well. It's important that we recognize that giving is really an emotional and inspiring thing. It really is. I mean, if you look at all of the studies, whether it's ours or others, there's a behavior to this. That's the warm glow effect of giving, the participation of seeing that, how that affects the individual. In the workplace, though, is that it's hard to ignore that we have that and we don't. We have authentic and inauthentic reasons for participating, and we have to recognize that that's occurring, that's sanctioned and unsanctioned, that all of these environments are existing. And for certain reasons, and you'll see this in the quotes in the report, is that some of our millennials felt that by not participating, they would be either left out or they would be talked about or they would be discriminated against in some way, in a light way. And that's unfortunate because that brings in the inauthentic way to cause engagement. And so as we look at it in the qualitative space even more, and we'll report more of this as we go forward, it's how do we move it to become more of an authentic reason to activate with a cause within the company time that you want to do. And why do that? Well, essentially, if the person feels empowered on their own, just like they would feel empowered to create products and services, they're going to have greater value, they're going to perceive greater value, adds to greater culture, and then, as you can imagine, goes up from there. So recognizing those two things exist, we want to try to remove as much as inauthenticity as possible. But that can happen. And what was interesting, too, is that millennials weren't saying, I don't want to do the company initiatives. It was understanding why they were doing it. So it doesn't mean it's a replacement. You go completely into an environment where it's all choice. It's just understanding the reasons why. And so that's where companies have a bigger education than ever before. I leave you with a couple other things here as we depart. One is that you might be wondering, why should companies care? I think we talked about the workforce and what's happening, but in the end, I don't think there's a company in the world that would not like to have happier and employees that feel valued, and that their decisions that they make are valued, and the decision on their own to do and participate in a company policy is valued, and it's not going to be undermined by something else. All of this adds to the way that the way and the culture that we treat the employee and how we want that authentic relationship to be. The other thing is for nonprofits. Why is this important for you? It's because you have to recognize that companies themselves go through these challenges and struggles. They've got a lot of different nonprofits that approach them, a lot of different things. And they've got to create different leverages and different opportunities to ensure that people can get the most that they can out of the individual side and make sure that the CEO participates accordingly as well. So it's important to know what we're seeing happen in and outside the workplace, essentially, if we want to work with companies to inspire or give or even serve for the causes that we care about. Let's talk about the second phase of the research. So what I shared with you is just the quantitative part. A lot more data, a lot more other pieces that's in the report that you now have. Again, don't share it. I'm asking you to keep it secret. Now, the second phase, which we've actually kind of already started, we started that several months ago, is the qualitative part of this. We're tracking some of these employees that were part of the studies. They're participating in some focus groups and personal interviews to validate the research as well. We'll be debuting something in October, as well as something in January, and then we'll be gearing up to let everybody know what we're going to find out next year's in March. I can't give it away now about where the next focus for next year is, but I'll say that we're shifting not necessarily just from the workplace, but looking overarching at some newer and bigger things that are occurring in cause engagement with millennials. And so if you have any big ideas that you want to throw our way, always welcome to those, but we're kind of working on those right now. So now is the time. I hope that all of you can join me at MCon. I think most of you who are on this are your premium ticket holders, advanced copy of this, our research partners, some of them will be there too, and some of our special friends. MCon is June 24th. It is this Wednesday and Thursday. Your premium ticket holders have advanced opportunity to get into the premium lounge. I'll be there every once in a while. Please tell me what you'd love to know. Is there anything that we can do to help answer some of the questions? Our Dr. Amy Thayer, our Director of Research, will also be there. She can help you too, and some of our research team. If you can't make it in person in Chicago, you are more than welcome to join online at mcon.events. That's where the whole live stream will occur. You and about 18,000 other people will be there. And so it'll be an exciting time for you to hear and see and witness everything. You'll get a copy of this presentation as well as the video, not this week, but first part of next week too. So you'll have these at your disposal if you want to have a discussion with your team, and you're more than welcome to replay this video. So thank you so much for your time today. We let you out a little bit early. If you have any questions, I look forward to hearing them and seeing you this week at MCon. Thanks.